Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote-unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to cue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads, welcome back to another episode of the Positive Head Podcast. So happy to be here with you all. It is a pleasure, an honor to connect and share and all those lovely things. Going to jump right in here and start with a review on iTunes. This review is by Follower of the Light. Thank you, Brandon, for sharing your love and light with us every day. This podcast has become part of my daily ritual in my efforts to cleanse my life from years of negativity that I was harboring and to move closer towards the source of love that was buried beneath it all. When I'm having difficulty connecting my outer being with my inner source, your words inspire me to leap over those walls into the boundless unknown with loving acceptance. Sometimes I struggle with understanding whether my heart truly believes in the magic that I seek, and it can be daunting to realize how much resistance persists in my daily conscious practice. This is why I'm so grateful for the synchronicity that I feel each time I listen, as if the universe is reminding me that I am indeed following the light in the right direction. Oh, thank you so much, follower of the light. And even if you have your moments of maybe doubting, that is, just know that that's a natural part of this process, right? And the beautiful thing I always like to say is, hey, listen to this stuff with an open mind, but whatever you do, don't believe me. You've got your own ideas and thoughts about how reality works and whether or not this is true, and just listen with an open mind and see for yourself, because once you do that, you will see for yourself. It's like the book we've been reading by Neville, which we're going to continue here, by the way, today, getting down to the end. But you know, it's like he said, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years. This stuff is real. And anyone who applies these concepts and starts playing with creating their own reality and the power of assumption and all those things will find they always come back. I've yet to see anyone not see evidence that it's real. And the synchronicity is the universe winking at you. And, you know, for people who are really in the flow and people who are really living this day in and day out, and there's no doubt the amount of synchronicity is just ridiculous. I mean, even with the show, right? We all hear it and see it. If you're on the Facebook group, which if you're not, how dare you? It's Positive Heads with an S. Join. Lots of people are connecting there, sharing, supporting, and the amount of synchronicity. I mean, you guys have heard it in the reviews. I hear it in emails every day on the Facebook group. I mean, the amount of it is overwhelming. In my daily life, in other people's daily life, it's phenomenal. The stories are not, they're just beyond chance, right? So you know that though, and all I would say is just embrace the doubt, you know, be okay with the doubt, rather. Be okay with feeling negative. Be okay. Just love yourself there, because sometimes we do need to go through that, and we do need to, accept that the journey is the goal, and it is a spiral, and you're going to circle back on things you think you had kind of processed and moved through. It is 2 step forwards and 1 step back. So thank you so much for writing in. It definitely fuels my fire. For those of you who haven't reviewed on iTunes, please do so. We're also on Google Play now, and you can, of course, write in questions to Brandon@positivehead.com, or just submit through positivehead.com contact page as well. All right. So today we're going to pick right back up with Neville's The Power of Awareness. For you guys who haven't been, following along, or maybe you missed episodes, no big deal at all. That's why I chose this book, because it's one that anywhere that you listen is going to be helpful and insightful and empowering. So today we're actually getting towards the end here, chapter 23, and he gives case histories. So what a perfect, there you go. There's your synchronicity. Like, I didn't even really put this together till right this moment, because I just hadn't even thought about what was coming up next. And here's, I love this. Oh, isn't it beautiful? So now he's going to give case histories, just like I was referencing, perfectly tying into the review. Synchronicity all over the place. Magic is real, guys. This stuff is real. Don't believe me. See for yourself. Okay, let's go right in. It will be extremely helpful at this point to cite a number of specific examples in successful application of this law. Actual case histories are given. In each of these, the problem is clearly defined, and the way imagination was used to attain the required state of consciousness is fully described. In each of these instances, the author of this book was either personally concerned or was told the facts by the person involved. Number 1. Now, keep in mind, this book, guys, was written in 1952, so these are going back a ways, these stories. This is a story with every detail of which I am personally familiar. In the spring of 1943, a recently drafted soldier was stationed in a large army camp in Louisiana. He was intensely eager to get out of the army, but only in an entirely honorable way. The only way he could do this was to apply for a discharge. The application then required the approval of his commanding officer to become effective. Based on Army regulations, the decision of the commanding officer was final and could not be appealed. The soldier, following all the necessary procedure, applied for a discharge. Within 4 hours, his application was returned, marked disapproved. Convinced he could not appeal the decision to any higher authority, military or civilian, he turned within to his own consciousness, determined to rely on the law of assumption. The soldier realized that his consciousness was the only reality, that his particular state of consciousness determined the events he would encounter. That night, in the interval between getting into bed and falling asleep, he concentrated on consciously using the law of assumption. In imagination, he felt himself to be in his own apartment in New York City. He visualized his apartment, that is, in his mind's eye. He actually saw his own apartment, mentally picturing each one of the familiar rooms with all the furnishings vividly real. With this picture clearly visualized and laying flat on his back, he completely relaxed physically. In this way, he induced a state of bordering on sleep, at the same time retaining control of the direction of his attention. When his body was completely immobilized, he assumed that he was in his own room and felt himself to be lying in his own bed. A very different feeling from that of lying on an army cot. In imagination, he rose from the bed. He walked from room to room, touching various pieces of furniture. He then went to the window and, with his hands resting on the sill, looked out on the streets on which his apartment faced. So vivid was all this in his imagination that he saw in detail the pavement, the railings, the trees, and the familiar red brick of the building on the opposite side of the street. He then returned to his bed and felt himself drifting off to sleep. He knew that it was most important in the successful use of this law that at the actual point of falling asleep, his consciousness be filled with the assumption that he was already where he wanted to be. All that he did in imagination was based on the assumptions that he was no longer in the army. Night after night, the soldier enacted this drama. Night after night, in imagination, he felt himself honorably discharged, back in his home, seeing all the familiar surroundings, and falling asleep in his own bed. This continued for 8 nights. For 8 days, his objective experience continued to be directly opposite to his subjective experience in consciousness each night before going to sleep. On the 9th day, orders came through from battalion headquarters for the soldier to fill out a new application for his discharge. Shortly after this was done, He was ordered to report into the colonel's office. During the discussion, the colonel asked him if he was still desirous of getting out of the army. Upon receiving an affirmative reply, the colonel said that he personally disagreed, and while he had strong objections to approving of the discharge, he had decided to overlook these objections and to approve it. Within a few hours, the application was approved, and the soldier, now a civilian, was on a train bound for home. There you go, follower of the light. Some synchronistical stories for you. You want another? All right. Just so happen to have one. Number 2. This is a striking story of an extremely successful businessman demonstrating the power of imagination and the law of assumption. I know this family intimately, and all the details were told to me by the son described herein. The story begins when he was 20 years old. He was next to the oldest in a large family of 9 brothers and 1 sister. The father was one of the partners in a small merchandising business. In his 18th year, the brother referred to in this story left the country in which they lived and traveled 2,000 miles to enter college and complete his education. Shortly after his first year in college, he was called home because of a tragic event in connection with his father's business. Through the machinations of his associates, the father was not only forced out of his business, but was the object of false accusations impugning his character and integrity. I don't know if I've ever seen that word. I imagine that's not a good thing, though. Okay, so he's impugning his character and integrity. Impugning. Oh, dun, dun, dun. I'm going to look it up just to be sure. Okay, yep, it's impugning. I've never read it before. I've never seen it written out before. All right, guys, don't laugh at me too hard. Okay. At the same time, he was deprived of his rightful share in the equity of the business. The result was he found himself largely discredited and almost penniless. It was under these circumstances that the son was called home from college. He returned, his heart filled with one great resolution. He was determined that he would become outstandingly successful in business. The first thing he and his father did was to use the little money they had to start their own business. They rented a small store on a side street not far from the large business of which the father had been one of the principal owners. Then they started a business bent upon real service to the community. It was shortly after that the son, with instinctive awareness that it was bound to work, deliberately used imagination to attain an almost fantastic objective. Every day on the way to and from work, he passed the building of his father's former business, the biggest business of its kind in the country. It was one of the largest buildings with the most prominent location in the heart of the city. On the outside of the building was a huge sign on which the name of the firm was painted in large, bold letters. Day after day, as he passed by, a great dream took shape in the son's mind. He thought of how wonderful it would be if it was his family that had this great building, his family that owned and operated this great building. One day, as he stood gazing at the building, in his imagination, he saw a completely different name on the huge sign across the entrance. Now the large letters spelled out his family name. In these cases, history's actual names are not used. For the sake of clarity, in this story, we will use hypothetical names and assume that the son's family name was Lordard. I don't know why he chose Lordard, but all right. Saw the family name where the sign read FN Moth and Company. In imagination, he actually saw the name letter by letter, J.N. Lordard and Sons. He remained looking at the sign with his eyes wide open, imagining that it read J.N. Lordard and Sons. Twice a day, week after week, month after month, for 2 years, he saw his family name over the front of that building. He was convinced that if he felt strongly enough that a thing was true, it was bound to be the case. And by seeing in imagination his family name on the sign, which implied that they owned the business, he became convinced that one day they would own it. During this period, he told only one person that what he was doing. He confided in his mother, who with loving concern tried to discourage him in order to protect him from what might be a great disappointment. Despite this, he persisted day after day. 2 years later, the large company failed and the coveted building was up for sale. On the day of the sale, he seemed no nearer ownership than he had been 2 years before when he began to apply the law of assumption. During this period, they had worked hard and their customers had implicit confidence in them. However, they had not earned anything like the amount of money required for the purchase of this property, nor did they have any source from which they could borrow the necessary capital. Making even more remote their chance of getting it was the fact that this was regarded as the most desirable property in the city, and a number of wealthy business people were prepared to buy it. On the actual day of the sale, to their complete surprise, a man, almost a total stranger, came into their shop and offered to buy the property for them. Wow. Due to some unusual conditions involved in this transaction, the son's family could not even make a bid for the property. They thought the man was joking. However, this was not the case. The man explained that he had watched them for some time, admired their ability, believed in their integrity, and that supplying the capital for them to go into business on a large scale was an extremely sound investment for him. That very day, the property was theirs. Oh, that gives me chills. How beautiful. What the son had persisted in seeing in his imagination was now a reality. The hunch of the stranger was more than justified. Today, this family owns not only the particular business referred to, but owns many of the largest industries in the country in which they live. The son, seeing his family name over the entrance of this great building, long before it was actually there, was using exactly the technique that produced results. By assuming the feeling that he already had what he desired, by making this a vivid reality in his imagination, by determined persistence, regardless of appearance or circumstances, he inevitably caused his dream to become a reality. Love, love, love that story. Wow, magical. Before we continue on with today's episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to tell you about our sponsor, HelloFresh. I'm sure by now you have at least heard of this hugely popular food delivery service that makes cooking much less of a headache with its pre-portioned ingredient recipes and simple step-by-step preparation instructions. What you may not know is their delicious recipes are ready in 15 minutes or less and are 25% cheaper than takeout. And now, in addition to convenient meals, it's easier than ever to skip that extra grocery store run by adding snacks, sides, and more to your weekly order. The HelloFresh Market has a curated selection of over 100 items. As someone who can sometimes suffer from decision fatigue due to all the projects and demanding work on my plate, I personally love the convenience of having my meal plate decisions already figured out for me with something healthy, fast, and fresh. And if you're interested in trying out HelloFresh for yourself, as a listener of this podcast, you'll get 50% off your order plus free shipping by going to hellofresh.com/positivehead50 and using the code positivehead50. All right. Follower of the light. Let's go to number 3, shall we? Number 3, this is the story of a very unexpected result of an interview with a lady who came to consult me. One afternoon, a young grandmother, a businesswoman in New York, came to see me. She brought along her 9-year-old grandson who was visiting her from his home in Pennsylvania. In response to her questions, I explained the law of assumption, describing in detail the procedure to be followed in attaining an objective. The boy sat quietly, apparently absorbed in a small toy truck, while I explained to the grandmother the method of assuming the state of consciousness that would be hers were her desires already fulfilled. I told her the story of the soldier in camp who each night fell asleep, imagining himself to be in his own bed in his own home. When the boy and his grandmother were leaving, he looked up at me with great excitement and said, "I know what I want, and now I know how to get it." Surprised, I asked him what it was he wanted. He told me he had his heart set on a puppy. To this, the grandmother vigorously protested, telling the boy that it had been made clear repeatedly that he could not have a dog under any circumstances, that his father and mother would not allow it, that the boy was too young to care for it properly, and furthermore, the father had a deep dislike for dogs. He actually hated to have one around. All these were arguments the boy, passionately desirous of having a dog, refused to understand. "Now I know what to do," he said. "Every night, just as I'm going off to sleep, I'm going to pretend that I have a dog and we're going to go for a walk." "No," said the grandmother, "that is not what Mr. Neville means. This was not meant for you. You cannot have a dog." Approximately 6 weeks later, the grandmother told me what was to her an astonishing story. The boy's desire to own a dog was so intense that he had absorbed all that I had told his grandmother of how to attain one desire, and he believed implicitly that at last he knew how to get a dog. Putting this belief into practice, for many nights, the boy imagined a dog was lying in his bed beside him. In imagination, he petted the dog, actually feeling its fur. Things like playing with the dog and taking it for a walk filled his mind. Within a few weeks, it happened. A newspaper in the city in which the boy lived organized a special program in connection with Kindness to Animals Week. All school children were requested to write an essay on why I would like to own a dog. After entries from all schools were submitted and judged, the winner of the contest was announced. The very same boy who weeks before in my apartment in New York had told me, "Now I know how to get a dog," was the winner. In an elaborate ceremony which was publicized with stories and pictures and in the newspaper, the boy was awarded a beautiful collie puppy. In relating this story, the grandmother told me that if the boy had been given the money with which to buy a dog, the parents would have refused to do so and would have used it to buy a bond for the boy or put it in the savings bank for him. Furthermore, if someone had made the boy a gift of a dog, they would have refused it or given it away. But the dramatic manner in which the boy got the dog, the way he won the citywide contest, the stories and pictures in the newspaper, the pride of achievement and joy of the boy himself all combined to bring about a change of heart in the parents, and they found themselves doing that which they never conceived possible. They allowed him to keep the dog. All this, the grandmother explained to me, and she concluded by saying there was one particular kind of dog on which the boy had set his heart. It was a collie. Wow, chills. These are awesome stories. Aren't they inspiring? Look at what we can do. Hey. Oh, man. Okay. Number 4. This was told by the aunt in the story to the entire audience at the conclusion of one of my lectures. During the question period following my lecture on the law of assumption, a lady who had attended many lectures and had had personal consultation with me on a number of occasions rose and asked permission to tell a story illustrating how she had successfully used the law. She said that upon returning home from the lecture the week before, she had found her niece distressed and terribly upset. The husband of the niece, who was an officer in the Army Air Force stationed in Atlantic City, had just been ordered, along with the rest of his unit, to active duty in Europe. She tearfully told her aunt that the reason she was upset was that she had been hoping her husband would be assigned to Florida as an instructor. They both loved Florida and were anxious to be stationed there and not to be separated. Upon hearing this story, the aunt stated that there was only one thing to do, and that was to apply immediately the law of assumption. Let's actualize it, she said. If you were actually in Florida, what would you do? You would feel the warm breeze. You would smell the salt air. You would feel your toes sinking down into the sand. Well, let's do all that right now. They took off their shoes and, turning out the lights, in imagination, they felt themselves actually in Florida, feeling the warm breeze, smelling the sea air, pushing their toes into the sand. 48 hours later, the husband received a change of orders. His new instructions were to report immediately to Florida as an Air Force instructor. 5 days later, his wife was on a train to join him, while the aunt, in order to help her niece to attain her desire, joined in with this niece in assuming the state of consciousness required. She did not go to Florida. That was not her desire. On the other hand, that was the intense longing of the niece. Number 5. This case is especially interesting because of the short interval of time between the application of the law of assumption and its visible manifestation. A very prominent woman came to me in a deep concern. She maintained a lovely city apartment in a large country home, but because the many demands made upon her were greater than her modest income, it was absolutely essential that she rent her apartment if she and her family were to spend the summer at their country home. In previous years, the apartment had been rented without difficulty early in the spring, but the day she came to me, the rental season for summer sublets was over. The apartment had been in the hands of the best real estate agents for months, but no one had been interested even in coming to see it. When she had described her predicament, I explained how the law of assumption could be brought to bear on solving her problem. I suggested that by imagining the apartment had been rented by a person desiring immediate occupancy, and by assuming that this was the case, her apartment actually would be rented. In order to create the necessary feeling of naturalness, the feeling that it was already a fact that her apartment was rented, I suggested that she drift off into sleep that very night, imagining herself, not in her apartment, but in whatever place she would sleep were the apartment suddenly rented. She quickly grasped the idea and said that in such a situation she would sleep in her country home even though it were not yet open for the summer. This interview took place on Thursday. At 9 o'clock the following Saturday morning, she phoned me from her home in the country, excited and happy. She told me that on Thursday night she had fallen asleep, actually imagining and feeling that she was sleeping in her other bed in her country home, many miles away from the city apartment she was occupying. On Friday, the very next day, a highly desirable tenant, one who met all her requirements as a responsible person, not only rented the apartment, but rented it on the condition that he could move in that very day. Wow. A few more here. Number 6. Only the most complete and intense use of the law of assumption could have produced such results in this extreme situation. 4 years ago, a friend of our family asked that I talk with his 28-year-old son who is not expected to live. He was suffering from a rare heart disease. The disease resulted in a disintegration of the organ. Long and costly medical care had been of no avail. Doctors held out no hope for recovery. For a long time, the son had been confined to his bed. His body had shrunk to almost a skeleton, and he could talk and breathe only with great difficulty. His wife and 2 small children were home when I called, and his wife was present throughout our discussion. I started by telling him that there was only one solution to any problem, and that solution was a change of attitude. Since talking exhausted him, I asked him to nod in agreement if he understood clearly what I said. This he agreed to do. I described the facts underlying the law of consciousness. In fact, that consciousness was the only reality. I told him that the way to change any condition was to change his state of consciousness concerning it. As a specific aid in helping him to assume the feeling of already being well, I suggested that in imagination, he see the doctor's face expressing incredulous amazement in finding him recovered, contrary to all reason, from the last stages of an incurable disease, that he see him double checking in his examination and hear him saying over and over, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle." He not only understood all this clearly, but he believed it implicitly. He promised that he would faithfully follow this procedure. His wife, who had been listening intently, assured me that she, too, would diligently use the law of assumption and her imagination in the same way as her husband. The following day, I sailed for New York, all this taking place during a winter vacation in the tropics. Several months later, I received a letter saying the son had made a miraculous recovery. On my next visit, I met him in person. He was in perfect health, actively engaged in business, and thoroughly enjoying the many social activities of his friends and family. He told me from the day I left, he never had any doubt that it would work. He described how he had faithfully followed the suggestion I had made to him, and day after day had lived completely in the assumption of already being well and strong. Now, 4 years after his recovery, he is convinced that the only reason he is here today is due to his successful use of the law of assumption. All right, there's a couple more stories here, but we're getting down to it for today, so I'm going to save those. We'll have one more episode. I thought we would finish up today, but we'll have one more episode, a couple more stories, the final very short chapters, and we will be done with this beautiful book. I absolutely loved this one. You guys know what a sucker I am for stories, and these are some good ones, aren't they? They're empowering. I mean, look at that. Someone like from a terminal illness, like, you know, and of course people say, oh, yeah, someone else tried it. It didn't work. Well, you know, what was the vibrational offering? Was there mixed signals? You know, what this guy said is, I knew it would work with all of my being. And I believe if someone is emanating the right assumption with all of their being, you can, you know, as to quote the Bible, right? As Jesus said, with the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain, right? That's a lot. That's a lot for a mustard seed is tiny if you've ever seen one. So yeah, such a powerful group of stories there. All right, guys. Well, as you know, while we're going through the power of awareness, I'm leaving you guys with, instead of a song, I've been ending each episode with a nano tap with the lovely Sonia Sophia from the World Tapping Circle. This one is called Releasing Regret.
Hi, it's me, Sonia Sophia, back to give you another nano tap, a really quick tap on releasing regret. So tune into something that you wish you hadn't said, you wish you hadn't done, something that maybe it's a big thing, maybe it's a small thing, but anything that's disturbing your wonderful, this is a great tap for it, okay? So massaging the front of the chest, big deep breath. Even though I have this regret, repeat after me, even though I have this regret, think about that regret. I'm open to loving and accepting myself. Tap the eyebrows, this regret. Tap the temples, big deep breath, big sigh. Even though I have this regret, and tap the front of your cheeks, I'm open to loving and forgiving myself. Tap under the nose. Even though I have this regret, I'm open to loving and forgiving myself for having to learn like that. Tap under the lips. This regret about, say what your regret is. Good. Tap the front of the chest. This regret about, say it again. Just tuning into the discomfort you have about the way that went down. Dropping down to the front of the rib cage. This regret. Big noisy sigh. And now to the side of the rib cage. I'm open to loving and forgiving myself, even though I still feel so what? Fill in the blank. How do you feel when you think about what happened? Beautiful. Tap the inside of the wrist. This regret. Tap the side of the thumb. This regret. Tune into it again. There it is. Tap the top of the head. I'm open to loving and accepting myself, even with the remaining regret about, and say what you're regretting again. Big noisy sigh, side of the head, back of the head, and breathe. Tap the eyebrows. I'm open to loving and forgiving myself, even though I had to learn about life and love this way. Tap the temples. I wish I hadn't what? Let's say it 3 times. I wish I hadn't, fill in the blank. Again, I wish I hadn't, and tap the front of the cheeks and sigh. Tap under the nose. I'm allowing myself to learn, heal, and evolve. Tap under the lips. I don't have to keep blaming or shaming myself about this forever, do I? Tap the chest. I don't have to shame and blame myself for the rest of my life for having to learn this way. Big deep breath, big sigh. Tap the front of the ribs. We're almost done. I'm open to bringing forgiveness to the part of me that didn't realize what? What didn't you realize that you realize now? Tap the side of the ribs. I forgive myself for not noticing or not understanding what? Inside of the wrist. I'm open to loving and accepting myself. Tapping the thumb one more time, even with this remaining regret that I still feel when I think about, and then say the situation again. And tap the top of the head. I'm open to releasing this regret, keeping the wisdom, and moving forward. Eyebrows, releasing the regret. Temples, keeping the wisdom. Cheeks, moving forward. Tap under the nose, big noisy sigh, tuning into that regret again. And under the lips, tuning into the regret one more time. And down to the chest. How do you feel now? I'm feeling softer. I bet you are too. Good job. Let's do more of this. Join me in the World Tapping Circle. We do it every Monday. You are going to love it. If you liked this, you're going to get so much out of the deeper, bigger, longer taps that we do. worldtappingcircle.com. See you in the circle.